The Doctor arrives on the stormy night of Frankenstein's creation, meeting Mary Shelly and having an adventure with the Cybermen. Sound a little bit familiar? Welcome to today's Doctor Who Series 12 episode review, as I am of course going to be taking a look at the 8th episode of the series, being The Haunting of Villa Diodati, as written by Maxine Alderton. Now this story is of course one of the final episodes of Doctor Who Series 12, and I think that everybody went into this story kind of expecting a little bit more, considering that we are now so close to the series finale, where we are expecting, I suppose, quite high stakes, as the publicity does seem to be promoting quite a lot. This episode has been a rather controversial story, I think it's fair to say, before it had even broadcast, because the key aspect of this story is of course the creation of Frankenstein, Mary Shelly and the Cybermen, and all three of those narrative points have of course been previously used within the Big Finish audio dramas, and of course fans of that series of audios, very much like myself, were rather concerned to see the new series basically copying and pasting the narrative choices of a Big Finish audio drama into the new series of Doctor Who. Of course, a few years ago we did have World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls, which did pretty much utilise some key elements from spare parts, however still managed to respect essentially the overall narrative of that story, so both of them can kind of coexist within the same Doctor Who canon at the same time. However, this story is a little bit more complex than that. We are going to see Mary Shelley on the night of Frankenstein, when she supposedly starts writing the book, of course having a writing competition with her friends surrounding her, as well as a few relatives. However, of course, we have a little bit of Cybermen involvement. Now, I'm going to address the main elephant in the room first. What is canon, the Silver Turk, or whatever, this story? And that is down to you. Of course, the Doctor Who canon is a big, complex beast, and something of which that I'm not really going to try and discuss throughout this video, and quite frankly I think it would be unfair for me to comment on it, simply because everybody has a personal preference. If you are a very Big Finish fan, like myself, I've not even listened to the Silver Turk, there you go, and I would probably favour that story over the televised story, simply because I prefer Big Finish to the TV series currently. I'm naturally going to support the body of media that I favour more, simply because as well their narratives do seem to be most of the time a little bit more superior. However, if you're a fan of the new series of the show, if you like the Villa of Diodati, maybe you will respect that episode a little bit more and decide to have that in your canon. It's all down to personal preference. Both of the stories coexist at the same time, there's nothing you can do about it, and quite frankly there is probably much bigger holes within Doctor Who history when it comes to plot. Once you start thinking about one of them, it then goes on to the other, and it's just a massive mind bomb of things that have happened within Doctor Who more than once. So it's a complex beast, and let's not even talk about it, because the Silver Turk exists, this story does as well, deal with it. I must admit, however, it is quite a bold choice to basically do exactly what Big Finish have already done. Naturally, of course, Big Finish's audience are smaller than the TV show, that is fair to say. However, I think that when we first seen the narrative of this story, I think it is in fact one of the early details that we knew about Doctor Who Series 12, that there will be a Cyberman story somewhere, and there's going to be Mary Shelley, because it was one of those unusual articles that kind of was revealed on social media and other media platforms. It was all around the same day, and all of these sources, like the newspapers, were reporting it. It was kind of a number of years ago where we had the Davros child plot leak, which was a very obscure idea that given Big Finish have done in the past as well. However, it was very odd for all of these media outlets to be commenting on it at the same time like it had been leaked, and that was very much the case of this story. We had the early plot elements of this episode being leaked many months before the official announcement, and using the Cybermen as a mirror of Frankenstein is not original. It has been done many times before. The whole idea of the Cybermen is very Frankenstein-esque, and I suppose it's nice to see that visualised, I suppose, within the TV show itself. So firstly, going on to characters, because that is where we seem to start these reviews, the 13th Doctor actually had some things to do in this story, which is very good, addressing of course that lovely speech that she had about words matter. That was brilliant. It actually gave some script for Jodie to chew over and actually do some decent acting with. For once, she wasn't just delivering exposition and explaining everything to the companions, she actually had a little bit of conflict with the companions as to where their opinions and reactions to different things differ. And I like that, it was good. It's nice to have once again that continuation of the cracks starting to form within this TARDIS team, and it starts to link back to that more darker side of the 13th Doctor that I previously commented on in the previous reviews for this series, that is really giving giving me vibes of the 7th Doctor era, starting off with that comical incarnation, and then starting to link in that darker, mysterious side. I've also noticed in relation to that we're having a lot of the mind stuff coming back, such as her using, of course, her mind in Shelley's mind at the end of the story in order to believe that he is dead, and then of course the cyber technology comes out of him. Once again, something that I could imagine the 7th Doctor doing, because it's all about contorting the mind and having their own plans. As for the TARDIS team, Ryan was alright. He had a few things to do, a few funny moments where he thought he was touched by a ghost on his arm, but it was Yaz's elbow. That was a nice gag. Yaz didn't really have too much to do. If anything, she got on my nerves a little bit at a few points, such as spouting exposition as soon as the Cyberman appears, and she goes, "What Jack said," the previous story, just in case you forgot, which I imagine, if you've been watching Doctor Who, you are highly unlikely to forget Captain Jack Harkness coming back only a few episodes before, so it did feel a little bit jarring, that moment. Writers feel the need to spoon-feed their audience as to what happens. But yeah, Yaz didn't really have too much to do. Graham was okay. Once again, a few comical moments. I quite liked him. However, they were just kind of more focused around being standard companions, really. There were cardboard cutouts more than anything, because the vast majority of the plot was once again kind of dedicated to this rather large cast, giving all these different characters things to do. Very much a similar idea to what was seen within Orphan 55, as well as the Nikola Tesla story. Admittedly, the latter episode did do it a lot more effectively, but having stories such as this with a large cast basically detract from the focus of the companions and the Doctor, which sometimes can be good, but other times can be just a little bit boring. Then we have Mary Shelly. Let's talk about Mary Shelly, because it's her kind of story in a way, I suppose, but at the same time it isn't, which kind of brings me to one of the first flaws I have with this story, because we are using one of the most integral female writers throughout Earth's history, because she created one of the most infamous ghostly horror stories, I suppose, of all time, kind of setting the foundation almost of Gothic literature, and this story doesn't seem to do anything with that. It really, she could have been anyone. It didn't feel like a writer, or a possible writer of the future, of course, because at this point she hasn't written Frankenstein, which is a bit of an unusual twist. However, she just feels like a random character. She doesn't really have the oomph behind her that previous characters from history have had within Doctor Who. Comparing this episode, for example, to Rosa, there was a big monumental moment where Doctor Who meets Rosa in The Unquiet Dead, where the Doctor meets Charles Dickens. Even relating to this series, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, where you have the Doctor meeting Nikola Tesla. It felt more real. I think that the portrayal in Nikola Tesla's story, I can't remember the name of the actor now because it was a few weeks ago, and my mind is short-term when it comes to Doctor Who these days. In that story, that portrayal felt a lot more believable. In this story, we did have a nice portrayal of Mary Shelly, don't get me wrong. However, I was expecting more, especially in relation to the Frankenstein stuff. I'm kind of going on the mindset of, if the Silver Turk did not exist, and you have one opportunity for the new series Doctor to meet Mary Shelly and have a story focused around the Cybermen and have parallels between Cybermen and Frankenstein, this episode didn't do that, and it felt a little bit like a wasted opportunity. It didn't play with those ideas that I'm assuming Big Finish did, judging by the reviews that I've heard, because I've not listened to the Silver Turk, which, reflecting on that when watching this story, I think is in fact a benefit, because no doubt throughout this entire review I will be just basically saying how much better the Mary Shelley trilogy on Big Finish is compared to this story, which is not the aim of this review. I still think that this story has a lot of credible moments. I love the atmosphere of the actual Villa Diodati itself. I love the spooky aspect of this story. It felt very much like traditional Doctor Who ghost story. I loved, what's his name, Fletcher, the sort of servant character. He was my favourite character of the story, because of the contributions that he gave to the plot, just those little side rolls of his eyes, the batting of the tray, killing the hand, sort of the skeletal hand, and then when he died as well, that was the biggest injustice within this series. I just hated him dying because I liked the character. He was likeable for the very little that we've seen in him, and I think that that shows how good an actor can be. He's a background character, he's written to be a background character, and he was just so funny, and he was one of my favourite aspects of the story, and I actually got to the extent within the early half where I thought, he's the background character, but because we're focusing on him, Are we going to see more? Is he the bad guy? That was the thought process I started to think at the beginning of this episode. However, no, he was just a well-written character, so it's good to see that Maxine Alderton has padded out the less necessary characters of the piece to make them feel real and contribute something to the narrative, and more importantly, make it feel like a real natural environment that, be it does hop around a bit and have different rooms and did up almost a bit Castrovalva-ish in its design. And then we of course have the lone Cyberman, which does come in, I do believe, around 26 minutes into the story, which was actually quite a good time. I think that overall the pacing for this story was pretty good. I liked the fact that we had the ghost stuff at the beginning, making it feel like an average Doctor Who ghostly episode. Then we add in the other level of the plot arc itself. I did like that. Given, of course, that the Cybermen are in the series finale, and this episode is Mary Shelly and Frankenstein, put 2 and 2 together, it was quite obvious that the Cybermen were going to be in this story. It would be stupid if they weren't. And I did like that. I liked the divide, and the only thing I didn't like was when the Cyberman did appear, the Doctor then went, the lone Cyberman. It's like you don't see one thing go, it's lone, it's by itself. Once again, spoon-feeding the overall plot arc of the series to the audience. It just reminds me that maybe the writing team currently aren't as developed as I kind of wish they were. I'm kind of wanting a bit more of that Moffat-esque plot coming in, where you feel like you need to watch the story again because some of the narrative is overall rather complex and doesn't spell out absolutely everything for you, which is what this story kind of did, especially in relation to the lone Cyberman and the weird cyber technology, the Cyberium, I say, referring to my notes, the Cyberium, that thing. It's basically the new series AI version of the Cyber Planner, from what I can tell, which is interesting. It's a cool take, I suppose, and I suppose we'll see more of that within the next 2 stories, so I'm not really going to comment on that too much, but yeah, it was fun, I suppose. Talking about the lone Cyberman himself, of course, this Cyberman that doesn't have the emotional inhibitor. Interesting take, once again, on the Cybermen. However, I do feel that new series Doctor Who has this habit of going away from what the Cybermen originally were, which is odd. Once again, given that this story has the Frankenstein parallels, I would expect this story more than any to kind of talk about the human aspect. I think that World Enough and Time did that phenomenally. I loved it. I loved World Enough and Time as an episode, and it just captured the eeriness of the Cybermen, and this story did that as well to an extent. I adored the scene where Mary Shelley confronted the Cyberman, and we had that almost closing time moment with, you know, the 11th Doctor in Series 6, where we had the defeating by love moment. I was on the edge of my seat at that point, because I genuinely thought we were going to have another defeat the Cyberman by love episode, which I would have hated, and this episode would have been instantly my least favourite story of the season, simply because of that plot point alone, because it's just a terrible way to take the Cybermen. However, this episode of course has that twist, almost a double bluff of the lone Cyberman lying to Mary Shelley, or making it look like he was feeling emotion, and then turning around, going to the extent of saying, I slit my children's throats when they turned to the other side, or something like that. Brilliant. I loved that. The gothic imagery, perfect. The visual design, perfect. I love the fact we could see half of the face, very Frankenstein-esque once again, but for a story that to me is the perfect narrative ground to do the body horror of the Cybermen, I was expecting more. I was expecting a World Enough and Time spare parts Silver Turk vibe. I wanted to see more body horror compared to what we got. This episode does sit in rather unusual territory, because visually this episode looks great. I love the way it captured that gothic-esque visual appeal with the gothic house and kind of the archways and things and the dark corridors, all of that brilliant. The characters were okay to an extent, with an exception of the lack of development of Mary Shelly. And of course it did give the opportunity for the 13th Doctor to actually do a bit of acting, which is great, because the more of that the better. Because speeches such as the words matter speech do normally happen quite early on within a Doctor's era to kind of solidify their place as the Doctor. It's kind of the turning point throughout the early half of their first season. However, we've not got that up until now, which may say quite a lot about this era of the show. However, I still find this story watchable, but I kind of feel like the inner critic in me is kind of saying, no, there's these several different flaws in the plot that I do not like, but I still don't mind watching it, even though I kind of feel it's not as good as some of the other stories within this season. It's definitely watchable. I would say it does have a good repeat viewing potential, and I'm possibly guessing that this story may have a few future kind of involvements within the upcoming 2 stories within the season. The fact that Graham did see those ghostly characters, of course playing on the idea, are ghosts real and sort of the paranormal, which is great. However, I have a gut feeling that there may be a bit more to that than originally meets the eye, especially the food thing. This is kind of a random tangent my brain went off on when writing the notes for this review, but I thought, what if the Cybermen made a way to plague liquid and food in order for them to go into a colony of Earth, give them food, supply some food, which then gradually converts them into Cybermen. So could we possibly get to the halfway through the next story, or maybe even within the series finale, and then we find out that Graham is gradually converting himself into a Cyberman due to the fact that he ate some what looked like breaded chicken within this story. It may happen, who knows, it may be an unusual twist. Another take that I did think may occur is the Cybermen might give Graham an offer, and he might be a little bit naive about it, and maybe says something around the fact of, you have cancer or you're a cancer survivor, it still has the potential to return, convert to be a half Cyberman, and it's gone because we can get rid of it, because we are Cybermen, we are all powerful and all of that, we are inevitable, which was a nice way that this episode did of course phrase it. Either that, they're going to go down the emotional route, or Ryan is going to get converted. I will be shocked if Ryan comes out of the season alive. Very, very shocked. I think if anybody will come out of the season, it is most likely going to be Yaz, alive that is. Possibly, fingers crossed, Graham. However, at the minute, I'm kind of thinking Graham or Ryan. If all of them come out of it alive, I'm going to be disappointed, to say the least, because I feel like one of them, by this point, needs to go, and the next 2 stories, hopefully, might do that, which is odd. The fact that I'm hoping for a companion departure through the medium of death, I don't just want them to leave, is unusual, but I think that's kind of the point that we've got to within this TARDIS team, where in order to have further development, we need to have them essentially pushed over the edge to breaking point. We need the companions to suffer a loss to either make them bond further or make them crack even more. That is the only way, in my eyes, they can take this. So overall, for the Haunting of Villa Diodati, I must admit, out of all of the episodes so far this series, I've found this one the hardest to review, because I kind of feel like there's elements of this story that I like, and there's elements I dislike. However, I don't know which one overpowers the other. It just depends, I suppose, probably in the future, what day you catch me on, and how I feel about that story at that given moment. And I also feel at the same time that the future episodes of this series are going to provide further context for this episode, so I imagine within the next 2 reviews, I'm going to be referring back to this story, hopefully to give it more positive feedback. But other than that, I kind of feel like this story has made me feel a bit lost. Once again, it was enjoyable in parts, however not enjoyable in others. For me personally, I was expecting a lot more development of Mary Shelly, because she is an interesting historical character that I wanted to see more of around the Nikola Tesla level, because that was a way to do the Doctor meets a historical character within a narrative. But yeah, join me in my next reviews of Doctor Who Series 12, where, as I say, hopefully we'll be returning to this story, maybe providing further development of the characters, because I'm hoping that we may have a few flashbacks to this episode to give it a bit more relevance and kind of overall scale within the series itself, as given that this is the return of the Cybermen, to me it just didn't have the oomph behind it, but I still kind of enjoyed it. It does of course bring me to the Doctor Who Series 12 ranking, which I imagine is going to be rather interesting this time round. So as a reminder, at number 1 we have Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, number 2 is Spyfall Part 2, Fugitive of the Judoon is at number 3, number 4 is Spyfall Part 1, Can You Hear Me is at number 5, Orphan 55 is at number 6, and Praxeus is at number 7. So where are we going to put The Haunting of Villa Diodati? And overall, I have in fact concluded that this episode comes in at number 6, therefore above Orphan 55 and Praxeus, however below the previous story of this review series, which was of course Can You Hear Me, because for some reason that story to me stands out. I can still remember aspects of that story that to me are worth a lot of credit, arguably in my eyes more credit than this episode, but I imagine the series finale may change up this ranking quite a lot. I'm going to be quite interested to see how it does affect this series overall, but I'm quite worried at the same time. We have a Cyberman two-parter on the way, of course set within the Cyber Wars, and I'm expecting a bit much, I think. I don't know if they're going to involve the Timeless Child stuff, because we've already had a quote, I do believe, from Chris Chibnall, saying that that is going to be extended probably into the next series or even beyond, which I'm guessing we're not going to get an end to that anytime soon, so I won't be surprised if we don't get any reference to the Roof Doctor or even Gallifrey. I think it might be a solely Cyberman-focused story, even though the final episode is called The Timeless Children. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a red herring. I mean, it's either going to be a decent episode, or it's going to be a bit of a flop, which worries me, because we've had so far in the past decade a lot of Cybermen series finales, and at this point, is it getting a bit old? Do we need to upgrade the Cyberman plots? Pun. Do we need to do something with them that gives them the oomph, especially after World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls, which to me was a very good Cyberman story. And let's just say this episode has a lot more to live up to, so yeah. As always with this series, only time will tell. Thank you very much for watching my review of course, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. What did you think of this story? Why not leave your mini reviews in the comment section below? We'll be incredibly interested to hear them. And also, why not leave your theories for the series finale of Doctor Who Series 12? What do you think is going to happen? Who is going to come out of it alive? Are we going to have some more reveals? Is some unexpected characters going to return? Who knows? Why not let me know in the comment section below? And of course, with that, I will see you all in my next Doctor Who review, which will of course be coming at some point in the near future. So thanks for watching. I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.